And with us today is Ann Douglas to provide proponent testimony. Welcome, and begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman Wiggum, Vice Chair John, and Ranking Member Kelly, members of the Ohio State Senate and Local Government Committee. I appreciate you hearing my testimony today. I think you're going to hear some evidence from Rocky River because that's what everyone's looking for, and we've got some. I'm Ann Douglas. I'm speaking on behalf of Rocky River Citizens for Transparency. I have had 5 children in the Rocky River City school system, and for the past 7 years, our school district has contracted with the Diversity Center of Northeast Ohio for student and staff diversity training. Our superintendent, Michael Schoaf, serves on the board of the DCNEO, Diversity Center, and is the primary decision maker in continuing to make contracts with the DCNEO. We have asked him to step down because of this conflict of interest, but he persists in serving on the board. Our district and the DCNEO have both claimed that they are not teaching critical race theory. However, our contract with the DCNEO includes a clause that materials are proprietary and cannot be reproduced without permission. School board members have requested to see the curriculum, but on May 18th, in a DCNEO email, they refused to show it to our own school board, stating in the email that the content is proprietary and cannot be shared. So I can attest with the pastor that it is hard to see the curriculum. But I said I have 5 children. I can see a lot of curriculum. I know that Ohio Revised Code 3313.60 entitles me to a prompt inspection of my own child's curriculum. Not anybody off the street can come in and see their curriculum, but you can see the curriculum of your own children. So on June 3rd, I submitted a request to inspect the diversity curriculum that's taught to my children. And 11 days later, on June 14th, the school district responded that I could come in and see the curriculum on July 27th in another month and a half. My right is to a prompt inspection. So I immediately met with the school board president, and I informed them that they were in violation of the law and that I needed to see the curriculum in the next 24 hours so they could consult my attorney. Miraculously, I was now able to view the curriculum within a couple of days. And so just last week, on July 18th, 15 days after I had requested to see the curriculum, my husband and I were able to inspect the Diversity Center. They gave us the training slides and handouts. Some of this curriculum was acceptable, some of it was even good, but there were clearly many tenets of critical race theory being taught to the children. And also there were clearly things that were being hidden from us. They did not give us all the curriculum. They did not give us the teacher's instruction notes. And I will give you some examples of what I saw when we sat down to finally view the curriculum. Students were asked to draw a pie chart with slices of various group identities that they belong to, such as race, ethnicity, sex, gender, socioeconomic status, ability, sexual orientation, nationality, age, and they were asked which group identity that they most strongly identified with, and then they were separated into groups for group discussion based on their strongest group identity. Group identity is one of the core tenets of critical race theory. The 7th grade students were taught the cycle of oppression, which circles through stereotype to prejudice and onto discrimination. The slides did not come out and say that whites are racist, but I know for a fact that my children have been taught that in these diversity training classes. And further testimony from Rocky River will bring this forth. The strong language of dominant and subordinate, oppressive and oppressive, which I know has been used in these classes, was absent from the slides that were shown to me. But then again, more testimony from Rocky River will bring that forth. I was not given the instructor's speaking notes. Every lesson began with an activity which would have the students to stand up and sit down as the instructor read statements. These statements were not shown to me. I just got an email last night that the district has added these to the packet, and I can make another appointment and I can go in and see the slides. That'll be like 3 weeks into my request that they're getting these things back to me. There was listed on the agenda slide for one lesson a section for implicit bias, but no content for this was included. It was as if it had been deleted to the material shown to me, and it made me wonder if the 15-day delay had been used to clean up the presented curriculum.
And we have finished the 5 minutes, so it sounds like you might have some other examples, but as we go through questioning, maybe those will come out. So if we can maybe ask questions of you now, is that okay?
Certainly.
Okay. Is there any questions from the committee? Yes, Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And actually, my question is about some of the stuff that's later in your testimony about teaching diversity. So I do appreciate that you have brought some examples of things that you've experienced in your family. But I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about whether you think if we're talking about diversity in schools and in life, is that sort of in the same lane for you as critical race theory? Are those two things different from each other? So I guess sort of how do we make sure that kids are prepared for a world that is diverse if we are not able to really talk about it as they go along their educational journey?
Well, through the chair to Representative Kelly, I believe that my main concern is with critical race theory not being taught. And I think many times we use the term diversity, and I'm not opposed to diversity. I'm not opposed to children getting to know what's different about their classmates and getting to appreciate the different heritages and cultures. I mean, Rocky River is a fairly white suburb, but that's who we are, and we have plenty of immigrants from all over the world in our community, and I enjoy having that diversity of learning about what country you came from and what customs you have, and trying to understand and be enriched by the diversity of different people we have in our district. I'm not opposed to diversity. I think I'm opposed to people using diversity as a cover to teach critical race theory, because I totally believe that's what's going on in our district.
Follow up?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that. So I guess my other question is about the existing, again, the existence of implicit bias, and whether you think that exists, and whether you think that there is an appropriate role in our schools, again, to just make sure that all of our young people, as they're growing up and as they, further their educational career, go into work, we want them to stay here and raise a family here. But is it appropriate, do you think, to talk about implicit bias to make sure that our kids have all the tools they need to have a good life?
Through the chairman to Representative Kelly, I believe if implicit bias is being used to teach critical race theory and to teach children that because you're white, you're racist, and because you come from the powerful, oppressing class, you're definitely already biased against your black classmates or your Latino classmates, I believe that's inappropriate. I mean, I understand that we can have biases towards other people, and it's good to be kind of aware of them, but I think what's being taught is that all you white kids are racist and you should be ashamed of yourselves, and we should all have white guilt, and I don't think that's helpful.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you for your testimony today. We have with us Karen Kane. Welcome, and begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Chairman Wiggum, Vice Chair John, Ranking Member Kelly, and honorable members of the House, State, and Local Government Committee. I am Karen Kane, and on behalf of Rocky River Citizens for Transparency, I am here to talk about our Rocky River teachers. They are subjected to training from the Diversity Center of Northeast Ohio, and as a result, they face an environment of fear and intimidation. Teachers are afraid to speak out about what they have seen and experienced in our school district. So I am here to speak about the teachers' experiences from stories they have told. The teachers in our district are required to participate in 5 hours every year of DCNEO teacher training. They are removed from their classrooms, substitutes are hired to manage their students, and they cannot opt out of the diversity training. They are required to participate in role-play activities in which they feel watched to make sure they do what the thought police want them to do. If any dare to challenge the agenda, such dissenters are sharply corrected. Teachers were shown a video featuring an adult woman interviewing a middle school-aged boy about his sexuality. Teachers are encouraged to eliminate gendered activities and to select books for their diversity content. Teachers are taught in sex and gender acceptance training to use pronouns and names that don't fit the biology of the child. They are required to discuss scenarios, like when a student is being misgendered, even after asking their classmates to use their pronouns. The teachers are not given two sides to consider in these scenarios, but only one acceptable approach, one that sides with the transgender child and silences any peers who think their classmate is still the biological sex that they used to be known by. Teachers are taught to use terms like sex assigned at birth, female or male. Sex has been separated from gender, and students are to be encouraged to question whether their gender is the same as their sex. The DCNEO knows and expects that some parents will object to these ideas. Teachers are encouraged to rehearse responses for when parents object that their children are too young to be talking about LGBTQ content. Teachers are given ways to respond to misguided parents who do not want teachers encouraging their child's transgender ideas, alternate names, or pronouns. This undermines parents' authority. It is the epitome of a divisive concept because it tears families apart. Shouldn't parents have more authority than the school when it comes to teaching their own children about sex? Teachers are trained that they need to be aware of their conscious and unconscious bias. Otherwise, they may teach lessons they didn't intend and unknowingly abuse students. Teachers are taught to question their religious faith. They are trained that minorities are worse off than white people from similar neighborhoods. Teachers are taught that racism is an abuse that only flows in one direction, that only people of color can be discriminated against. They are taught that white people should be discriminated against when it advances the cause of minorities. Teaching divisive content is not just happening to our students, it is happening to our teachers. They have this indoctrination shoved down their throats. They are expected to comply and to use this compelled speech. For the sake of the children and the teachers, please pass House Bill 327 and prohibit the teaching of these divisive concepts that are harming our schools.
Thank you for your testimony. Do we have questions? Representative Arthur Fowler.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Kane, for your testimony. I also had a teacher reach out to me this past week, not from Rocky River, but from my district, sharing a similar concern. Are you finding teachers reaching out to you and sharing examples about training that they're required to go to? Have you had conversations with any teachers about what would happen if they expressed a concern about the material that they're being asked to participate in, or shared that they maybe would prefer to not participate in that training but in a different implicit bias training or something similar? Have you had conversations with teachers that would give you some insight into what they feel might happen if they were to push back on that?
To Chairman Wiggum and President Fowler, Arthur, I brought Ann Douglas up here with me. She and I both are from Rocky River Citizens for Transparency, so she's going to help me out with some of the questions because she also spoke with some of the teachers. But to answer your question, I just feel that the teachers are afraid for their jobs to be, if they speak out against this. We did. You sought them out.
Yeah, I spoke to these teachers specifically to get a feel for what is going on in the district, because there's just been a lot of things going on in Rocky River, and some teachers have recently lost their jobs under suspicious circumstances, and part of that seems to be for their displeasure with the diversity training. So there's definitely an environment of intimidation, and they're definitely afraid to speak out. Yeah.
Follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that, and it sounds like you've had some conversations with your school board. Have you had the opportunity to bring forward these concerns to the board as well, that perhaps some of the teachers don't feel comfortable reaching out to them because they're concerned about their job? Are you aware if the local school board is aware of this concern?
Through Chairman Wiggum to Representative Fowler, Arthur. Well, we have a board meeting tomorrow night, so we will probably be discussing this tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Now we have with us Jacob Kane. Jacob, proceed whenever you're ready.
Chairman Wiggum, Vice Chair John, Ranking Member Kelly, and honorable members of the House, State, and Local Government Committee. My name is Jacob Kane, and I'm a recent graduate of the Rocky River School System. I participated in the Diversity Center program. I still remember the instructor teaching us that only white people can be racist. This is not an exaggeration. She said it matter-of-factly as though it was not up for debate. I remember it not just because of the confusion it caused amongst my classmates, but because of how backwards and misleading this idea is. To state that only one race is capable of prejudice and mistreatment of other races is both logically indefensible and suspiciously close to racism. One instructor asked us to describe her and would not stop calling on people until someone finally stated that she was black. Why did she insist that we use her race to identify her? What happened to people being judged not for the color of their skin, but for the content of their character? This is labeling people by their race, and it's counterproductive. We were also taught about inherent bias, the supposed subconscious, unremovable racism present in all white people. The Diversity Center teachings have a negative impact on all students, but the most harm is done to students of color. Telling a black student that their white peers inherently view them through the lens of negative stereotypes could make them begin to question their friendships. They might wonder if their friends secretly view them as inferior. They might wonder if their friends only spend time with them to prove that they are not like the bad white people. They could begin to feel alone in a place where they once felt welcome. These thoughts are damaging to a young individual, especially during the turbulent social landscape of high school. Confirmation bias is the psychological phenomena where once you believe something to be true, you start to see it everywhere. If you are taught to see everything through the lens of race, every mishap, inconvenience, or bad interaction will be interpreted as caused by racism. For example, a student not selected for a team because of a lack of skills may conclude it's because of their race. This dilutes the ability to respond to instances of real racism. These demoralizing teachings can result in a negative pattern of seeing others as enemies because of their skin color, a trait which should be no more defining than the color of one's hair or eyes. Students spend an enormous amount of time worrying about social relationships, trying to avoid criticism and the disapproval of their peers. If a student feels that another student won't like or trust them, they will be reluctant to interact with them. For many socially anxious students, it is simply not worth it to risk being labeled racist because of a botched interaction with a black classmate. They will choose to avoid the problem by avoiding the interaction altogether. Also, black students probably don't want their white friends to feel like they have to walk on eggshells around them. The training intended to solve racism instead drives a wedge between black and white students. Unproven theories were presented to us as facts. We were told that it was important that we believe these theories and that we needed to change our thought patterns if we didn't. These ideas do nothing to better the lives of students of color and provide no benefit to white students either. We do not need to be trained to interact with diverse groups. When left alone, children don't care about each other's race. Only by drawing attention to it and instilling a sense of division does real racism spread.
Thank you for your testimony. And will you take questions right now? Representative John.
Thank you, Chair Wiggum. Thank you for being here and testifying today. And so you talked about, I'm right here. So in your testimony, you said that you are a recent graduate and that you participated in the Diversity Center program. So was this program taught during the school day, during the school year?
Yes, it was.
And you had to, did they come onto the school property in order to teach it? Did you have to go somewhere to participate?
They came onto the school property.
Okay.
Follow up?
Also, did you, like, how many years did you participate? How often did you have to participate in the program?
Through the chairman to Representative John, we had the program only in freshman year of high school. I remember now they're trying to expand the program to also focus on younger children, though at the time that I took it, this was not the case.
Okay. Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming in today. I was just wondering, do you know how long this training, or this class, the Diversity Center program, was that something new for your class, or had that been taught for a long time before?
I took the training, Representative, through the chairman to Representative Kelly. Apologize if I got that wrong earlier. This is new for me. I took the training in 2015, which I believe was the first year that it was implemented. 2013 it was implemented. I took it in 2015. Did you ask how long we had it for? Is that the question?
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so my question, I was just curious about if this program was something that was relatively new, and so that's where some of the hesitations were coming, or if it had been offered long before, sort of if these were long-standing concerns, or if this is something that's a little more recent.
This, evidently it started in 2013. I took it in 2015. It's ongoing today. I do remember my classmates being confused and upset by this. Obviously, these ideas have become more widespread now, so people now will probably be less willing to say anything about it and more accepting of it. But at the time, I remember people being very upset and confused.
Follow up? Okay. Questions? See no further questions from the committee. Thank you for your testimony on this.
Thank you.
Now we have Rachel C Tack. Welcome, and begin whenever you're ready.
Good evening. Good evening, Chair Wiggum, Ranking Member Kelly, Vice Chair John, and members of the House and Senate Local Government Committee. Thank you for taking the time to hear proponent testimony on HB 327 to prohibit teaching, advocating, or promoting divisive concepts. My name is Rachel C Tack, and I am owner and operator of my own Black-owned, woman-run law firm in Cincinnati. My husband and I are attorneys, servicing clients across Ohio and Kentucky on a variety of legal issues. That includes custody, advocacy, and nonprofit law. My firm operates on the principles of fairness and equality. We take on a variety of pro bono cases and issues. We strive to treat each client with respect and kindness. I'm a Cincinnati native. I graduated from UC College of Law, and I completed my undergraduate education at Xavier University. I graduated there cum laude with a psychology major, English minor, that included in-depth studies on sociology, philosophy, and Black American literature. I attended K through 12 school in the Forest Hills District. As just one of a handful of Black students in my graduating class, I experienced my fair share of hurtful incidents related to race during my K through 12 years. I do not disagree that racism exists in this world and in our state. I disagree that critical race theory, or more accurately, critical theory, is equipped to solve it. On the contrary, critical theory only serves to perpetuate stereotypes, manufacture identity crises, and increase racial animosity. Critical theory is critically ineffective, it is critically flawed, and it's critically racist. In essence, critical theory increases racism and division instead of solving it. Critical theory is a wayward thread of postmodernism and relativism. It can be summed up as the belief that the problems we face in our world can be traced to the power structures within it. It requires us to seek out and cast off every power structure in order to be truly free. The problem is critical theory itself is a power structure in and of itself, and it's not a successful one. This is why critical race theory is critically ineffective. In the century since its arguable inception, critical theory has not solved sexism, racism, or any other ism. Instead, it capitalizes upon these isms to successfully divide societies and topple assumed power structures. This is critical theory working exactly as intended, to divide and conquer. It claims that this is going to lead to greater equity and inclusion for all, and in effect, these power structures become the perpetual boogeyman Critical theory makes our societal structure the scapegoat while it fails to deliver on its claimed ideals. It encourages division based in race, sex, and socioeconomic class. But the most important division is the oppressed and the oppressor. Under critical theory, everyone is stripped of their individual identities and assigned to groups and divided accordingly. These groups are then weaponized against those alleged to be privileged or oppressors. In this way, critical theory punishes groups in the present for actions in the past. It creates barriers like resentment and defensiveness, all while labeling these responses as white fragility. It is critically flawed. It does not encourage pride in one's race or inspire individualism because equity of outcome becomes more important than true equality of opportunity to pursue our God-given potential. It does not support development of character, kindness, or unity. Every action can be reduced to the alleged power structures in place, which elevate the inherently superior and deprecate the inferior. HB 327 returns power to the parents when it comes to shaping the developing worldview of Ohio's young minds. Parents deserve the opportunity to address such sensitive and difficult topics as racism and equality with their children. K-12 students should not be forced into a worldview that is favored by state-funded institutions addressing such topics in a divisive manner, potentially contrary to that family's values. HB 327 encourages transparency to hold local governments accountable. It does not prohibit schools from teaching about segregation, slavery, or incidences of racism in our nation's history. Rather, it requires schools to address these topics objectively and without bias, as should be required of a concept like racism that has no clear-cut answer provided by any arena of art or science, especially not the answers offered by authors like Ibram X. Kendi or Robin DiAngelo. Critical race theory is critically racist. From a legal perspective, I can't support these teachings for the next generation. In law school, I was taught that separate is inherently unequal. A social theory that encourages unequal treatment for one race is one that works towards inequality for all races. True diversity isn't just reflected in the color of our skin. It also means creating an environment where diversity of thought and creativity can flourish for Ohio's youth without any race-based favor or fatalistic preoccupation with one's ethnicity.
Ms. C Tack,
yes.
We had the 5 minutes are up. May we ask you some questions at this point?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. And Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming in. I will note that our higher education journeys mirrored each other because I am also an graduate of Xavier University and a graduate school graduate of the University of Cincinnati. So thank you for coming up. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you think the role of the local school boards should be. I know we had some questions about that before, and I know you talked a little bit about, this bill and parents, but I'm just wondering how you see the local school boards fitting in.
Absolutely. Through the chair to the representative, I actually have a client that's a group of parents that have assembled in Worthington, and they have filed a lawsuit because they had a public records request that was submitted, and the public record request wasn't timely responded to. It wasn't until that we filed suit that then we got the records that we were requesting. But at the school board, we had a member who said that it was impossible to be anti-racist unless they removed SROs from the school, and that's what prompted the parents to come together and have an issue. The school board in the meetings was promoting the readings of Ibram X. Kendi and becoming more anti-racist and working against white fragility. I reside in Anderson Township now, and there is another group of parents that I have been involved with, and that not for any pay, but just because I'm a resident there and I went to those schools. And there have been teachers that have told kids, there's been a teacher that told a kid to sit his white privileged butt down. And when we trace back to the teachings that the teachers are receiving from their administration, in Anderson Township we have a program called CARE that started because we had 3 students that committed suicide, and it really shook the community. And so then with the CARE program, which came under the guise of addressing those 3 suicides, it instead became an opportunity for the school to insert critical race theory teachings. We were able to look through what the teachers received as the goal of care. And I was able to see that it was steeped in critical race theory. It asked teachers to, staff members began work around understanding our own implicit bias, microaggression, and privilege. Equity is also a reoccurring theme in this program, and Hamilton County ESC had required reading for its staff members from Min Jung Pai. It's a book called Identity, Work, and Educational Justice, and I mean, if we have time, I could read just a short quote from the book. But looking at how this is coming down from the administrative level, it's trickling down through the teachers, down to the students, into the classroom, where even submitting public record requests, which often, schools are overwhelmed. There's numerous reasons why we might not get responses to those, but it's trickling down into the classroom, where the only way that parents are finding out about what's going on is if their student has the know about to feel that something's wrong with what they're being taught, and they come home and they tell the parent, and then the parent can try to address that with the school. But with no proof, school's not having cameras in every classroom, this is an ongoing issue that maybe if this law was passed, there would be a mandate from up high that kind of gives that structural a boundary of like, this is not okay.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so maybe if you want to submit those extra documents through the chair's office, then he could just share it through the rest of the committee. And thank you for that answer. And one of the things that sort of piqued my interest is, the idea of like an anti-racism policy and how that actually could be helpful to creating, if we're going to talk about equity and equality, to sort of endeavoring into a more equal, situation for everybody by creating some more equity and having anti-racist policies and really being deliberate and thoughtful about how to be inclusive and equitable. So I just didn't know if you thought, I will not presume to assume what you think, but if you thought that maybe there could be a role for anti-racist policy in trying to create more equity and more equal opportunity for everybody.
Through the chair to the representative, I can hear that there is care for the communities and what you're saying, and I think that that's where a lot of people are at, is that we see some issues that are going on, and we're looking for the best way to address this in the most efficient manner. And so a lot of times I think we go to this to address it rather than breaking it down. And part of breaking it down is realizing that through how these authors have defined it, anti-racism is not how it sounds. It sounds like that we're working against racism when we hear the word anti-racism. And when we hear equity, it sounds like we're working towards equality. But what's actually being perpetrated through these words and these theories is that anti-racism means that we work to tear down the majority, in this case it would be white people, in order to build up the minority, which in the case of critical race theory are races that are in the minority. And instead of working together to come to that, we use more racism in order to beat out racism, and it just doesn't work. We can't, as Martin Luther King said, we can't get rid of hate with more hate. And so I do not feel that anti-racism or critical race theory, or these authors that have come up with theories of white fragility, are the method that we should go about addressing issues of racism in our communities. What we need to do is we need to have more diversity. We can have more teachings of history. We can address the issues that are underlying some incidents of racism that we may see in our communities without instituting this divisive policy that has not been proven to be effective in eliminating or even decreasing racism.
Okay. Representative Fowler Arthur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. C Tack, for coming today. I appreciate you packed a lot into 5 minutes. Just picking up a couple things I'd like to ask regarding the definition of anti-racism and your comments to Representative Kelly, I passed a sign here in Columbus last week that said anti-racism is not the same as not a racist. And I'm just wondering, does this bill leave enough room for discussion in the classroom about policies in our history or history that may include racism or segregation without promoting an ideology that says you have to believe certain things? Can you elaborate a little on those definitions and whether or not, in your opinion, this bill would accomplish a goal of allowing more diverse education in the classroom?
Through the chair to the representative, part of the reason that I support HB 327 is because that it allows for children to perhaps have more education on historical incidences and historical development of Black leaders that I wouldn't have had. It allows for that to take place as a method of encouraging diversity and educating people. But it's not necessary to do that using critical race theory as the vehicle, because knowledge is power. And so we don't need a theory that taints children's worldview at an age when they need to just be learning about the world, and we don't need to involve critical race theory and anti-racism in order to do that. What we need is more diversity and more exposure. What critical race theory does is it encourages the hurtful stereotypes that I think led to incidences of racism that I experienced as a child, and it fights against the ignorance that I think also led to hurtful incidences related to race that I experienced as a child, versus anti-racism that really only seeks to create more division and emphasize the differences between us.
Follow up.
Thank you for that explanation, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I also received a question in a media interview last week about one of the topics you raised around parents having these discussions with their children. And the question I received was, what if the parent is promoting a racist viewpoint, and so wouldn't the school at that point have a responsibility to help promote more diversity? Can you speak a little bit to that, since you've been involved with parents that are trying to get more information from their school? What, in your mind, is the appropriate course for maybe a teacher who feels that a parent is encouraging a child to treat someone in a discriminatory manner?
Through the chair to the representative, it's a very unfortunate situation that we still have racism in our world, and that it's something that could quite possibly always be here because we're imperfect people coming from imperfect families, and racism is often something that starts at home. There's been studies that have shown that children often don't know a whole lot about race until it's introduced by someone or something hurtful happens. And so I can understand that educators are understanding, how do we grapple with this? I do not think that anti-racist teachings are the ways to go about dealing with a problem where we have individual families that are teaching racist values. What probably needs to happen is that the child be dealt with on an individual manner, but I'm not a parent. That's above my pay grade. I just know that this is not a way to come up with a blanket solution, because it's creating more problems than it solves, to deal with teaching an entire classroom anti-racist policies and requiring this as reading for them. So I would definitely not envy the educators in a position to figure out how do we deal with individual families that are teaching those values.
Okay. Representative Golonsky.
Thank you to the chair, and thank you very much for testifying today. You stated before that racism happens and that exists, and can you tell us where it exists when you made that statement? And then the second part of my question is, are you or do you know of a curriculum here in Ohio that teaches history about the impacts of redlining, disparities in healthcare, and lack of access to capital, educational gaps, et cetera? Two parts, two questions.
Through the chair to the representative, for the first question as to where it happened, I think it does start at home, and it can also be learned from children at school. I guess it is spread across the country, and it definitely is in our state. I'm not really sure the location, or do you mean like its origin? If you could, if the representative would just be allowed to provide more clarity as to what she means by where it comes from.
Representative,
Thank
go
you.
ahead,
Just
please.
to clarify, my question actually was building on your statement that racism exists, and I was wondering if you could tell us where it exists, in which parts of life.
What parts of life that racism exists in? I would say it starts in the heart. Someone has a heart issue. It's a heart and a mind issue. As for the second question as to whether these topics are addressed in school, I think that underlying the question, there's a really good effort to address that there is a multidimensional set of issues that are underlying things that we're seeing that may encourage someone or a school or an administrator to pursue anti-racist things. And that's exactly why I think it's important that we not just rest on a boogeyman of racism or of a proclaimed theory that's going to solve all the issues like anti-racism or critical race theory. We need to look at the issues individually and, where possible, in a manner that's not race-based, so that we can begin moving beyond the divisions that are dividing us and begin seeing the similarities that unite us.
Do you have a follow-up question then, after that clarification? Okay. Representative Ginter.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your patience with us. You're an excellent spokesperson, and therefore I am inspired to ask you a couple of tough questions. I applaud your courage for being here and for speaking as eloquently as you are. So my first question for you would be this: do you believe America is filled with or built upon systemic racism?
Through the chair to the representative, no.
If I may follow up.
Follow up, please.
So a clarification is that you believe, and thank you for that direct answer, you do believe that racism exists, as you have already stated on numerous occasions, but there is, of course, you recognize the difference between systemic racism and racism.
Through the chair to the representative, I think that with current events, I've heard this term so many times of systemic racism. And when I hear it mentioned, I often don't hear direct, clear-cut solutions that whoever's talking about it is working towards. I don't hear direct answers. I don't hear clarity on what that term is. I don't hear a clear definition. And so at this point, I cannot say that systemic racism exists. What I can say is that there have been socioeconomic disparities that have been pointed out. There's been issues with school testing that may not be reflective of children's true potential. There's been specific things that have been pointed out that we can work towards for all students that will help all students have an equal opportunity to pursue their greatest God-given potential. And so I cannot say that systemic racism exists or that this nation is founded upon that when I see that we are able to work towards those things and that we have a nation full of people who do care about working towards those things.
Thank you. Follow up?
Follow up. Go ahead.
What would be your definition of equality versus inequity? Or equity, I should say, equality versus equity.
Through the chair to the representative, I would define equity as the same outcome, and I would define equality as the same opportunities. And a lot of times I believe that people are confused about the two. And also a lot of times that we see disparities in outcomes, I think it's because that there can be hidden inequalities. And so there's a big difference between wanting everyone to have the same opportunity and wanting them to have the same outcome regardless of what opportunities or effort was put in.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Representative John.
Through the chair to the witness, hi, Rachel.
Hi.
As a fellow classmate from Joanne Davidson, I'm so proud of you today. Just let me take that for just a minute. But I do have a question. So there's been a lot of discussion in this committee on the topic of race, and I actually think it's been really good. But I have a question. My question is, when we look at racism as discrimination towards someone because of the color of their skin, because of their race, do you believe that that can only happen toward one race, that racism is only discrimination toward one specific race?
Through the chair to the representative, I would define racism as any time that there is a bias or a prejudice towards someone because of their race. And so that doesn't really leave any room for anyone to be racist or not racist based on what color they are, because I don't base it on what color the person is. I base it on that they're being discriminatory towards someone else of a different or even the same race. There's colorism, there's issues that can happen within a race, and so I won't limit my definition of racism to something that can only happen when it's based on a power structure. Unfortunately, what's happening with the term anti-racism is that we're basing the term racism on power structures, and so under that definition, it's impossible to be racist against someone if you are white or if you're of the majority race, because under that theory, you are the alleged position of power, and so then you can't be discriminated against because your race holds that power. I, on the other hand, define it according to the discrimination that takes place rather than the person's identity.
A follow-up?
Yes, thank you. So to me, it feels a little bit like maybe we're trying to redefine words, and words matter, but maybe we're trying to redefine words to get a different result or different something by just redefining a word like racism, because we don't maybe like that it doesn't fit the way we want it to fit, and so we're trying to redefine words. Does it feel like that to you?
Through the chair to the representative, in light of current events, again, I've seen a lot of words tossed around and a lot of definitions changed and a lot of what kids are calling virtue signaling, which is symbolic measures that don't really take any actions to fix the problems or find solutions. And so I do think that the wordplay is a lot of that. It's a lot of just dancing around the issue and pretending to make a difference or to make a change for one's own self-gain. Unfortunately, in the arena of politics, see that quite a bit. But in the end, I don't see amidst all the wordplay a whole lot of action being taken for all the recognition of the holidays that's happening in the corporate world and for all of the celebrations and the federal holidays that are being passed. I don't see a lot of action being taken to help Black communities. And I think that's what's frustrating about the wordplay so much, is that in the midst of all of that, Black communities are getting lost in the shuffle.
Question I have, we've talked a lot about outcomes. Outcomes are important. We want good outcomes. Do regional, cultural, and economic differences, regardless of a person's race, sometimes contribute to the outcomes that we have seen outlined maybe at times? Is there a way? I can ask you a second question, I guess, after that.
To the chair, yes, and it's a similar problem that I think from a legal perspective we've seen with college admissions, where I believe that we should be working towards solutions that address issues from non-racial bases, because then we can help more people and we can encourage more unity. If we look at whether or not scholarships should be given, not just on race, but on the underlying issues that are causing disparities within a certain race to be admitted. Is there issues with socioeconomic things that then we can address the socioeconomic basis or first-generation applicants to college. You know, when you address those underlying issues, you'll end up catching a lot of the disparities that we see and realize that it's not so much the race that's the issue, it's the similarities that we're sharing in these problems of socioeconomic differences that can be addressed in a non-racial manner that won't further divide us or cause resentment.
Okay. You actually answered my second question. Very good. Seeing no other questions. Thank you again for your testimony today.
Thank you.
We have with us Dr. Jennifer Kilgore. Welcome, and begin whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, Chair Wiggum and members of the Ohio House Local State and Government Committee, Representative Kelly of our Hamilton County, and Representative Arthur Fowler, with whom I had the pleasure of serving on the Ohio Board of Education, for providing this platform for me to share my observations and experiences as a career educator. I've taught in K-12 as a middle school English teacher and currently teach in the educational leadership departments of 2 universities, one that adheres to a contemporary worldview through a critical race theory lens and one that aligns with a Christian worldview. These 2 worldviews, especially when considered in an educational context, express divergent outcome realities regarding the sanctity of nurturing our youth to fulfill each potential and the ultimate goal for which we are preparing our students. Contemporary education challenges students to examine the world around them, learn in an academic curriculum with ever-increasing emphasis on the social aspects of academics and emotional learning, with aspirations of graduating young adults grounded in social advocacy. Educators are compelled to slight time allocated to teaching academics in order to instruct on values such as social justice, altruism, environmental awareness, just to name a few, historically learned at home, in church and community, now delegated to the classroom. Critical theory focusing on race challenges examination of all social institutions, and that is to say, everything, through an individual's experience as consequence of their skin color. Critical race theory makes assumptions about culture, communities, families, and individuals based solely on the superficial aspect of color as opposed to intellect, character, and morals. Education in the United States of America should be providing every student with a stable foundation, knowledge, and talent development upon which each may build a productive future. Every child should be taught that no nationality, ethnicity, sex, or color is inherently superior or inferior to any other, to treat everyone with respect and compassion and acknowledge individual value based on character and positive contribution, and should be taught an accurate account of history in order to avoid destructive actions of the past and pursue a positive future. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Do we have questions from the committee today? Representative Fowler Arthur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Kilgore, for joining us. It's good to see you again. I don't know if you mentioned it specifically in your testimony, but I know you've also had the opportunity to be a professor and preparing teacher candidates, and House Bill 327 specifically includes our institutions of higher education because we've had people express concern that they were not being exempted from an ideology being promoted as opposed to having a robust discussion about divisive concepts. Can you speak to anything in your experience about how some of these divisive concepts are coming in at the higher education levels and how that might trickle down to students in other grade levels?
Through the chair and to the representative, thank you for the question. try to be brief, and I'll try to answer what you asked. I've taught young people aspiring to be teachers for 22 years. The last decade, my class has been taught through the lens of critical race theory. And I teach young people who aspire to be teachers. So these young people are being grounded in critical race theory, the young people who are hired in our schools K through 12 to teach our children. Critical race theory teaches, if you teach through the lens of critical race theory, you teach students to observe every issue, not through any other context than race. Race is the bottom, is the formidable reason for any discrepancy or any issue or any occurrence.
To follow up?
Sounds like we're playing Operation. Thank you for that, and I appreciate that context for us. My second question is, do you believe, after reviewing House Bill 327, that it would allow those teachers or those teacher candidates to have the freedom to refocus on providing high-quality academic instruction to all of their students, regardless of their ethnicity? And I don't want to make that more questions.
Mr. Chair, Representative, could I ask you to qualify that just a little clearer?
Please, clarify.
I apologize. I was trying to loop too many things into that. Just whether or not you believe that House Bill 327 allows teachers to refocus on academic principles. Your testimony mentioned that they have to spend a lot of time on social aspects as opposed to necessarily focusing on reading and writing and arithmetic. Can you speak to whether or not the bill allows teachers the flexibility to focus on those academic aspects?
My response to your statement asked as a question is that your bill 327 would allow teachers to teach the subject without the distractions of critical race theory, without the distractions of looking at critical race. It's looking through a historical lens, acknowledging, again, so this is teaching a true history, acknowledging the context of events in our past, but then also realizing that we're in a world today where individualism is more important, and the contributions that an individual may make to society is important, without the lens of race. So the short answer to your question is yes, they would have more opportunity to focus on the subject matter.
Okay. Representative John.
Thank you, through the chair, to the witness, Dr. Schaefer-Kilgore. So we've had some questions about examples and giving examples of when this is actually happening, if it's actually happening, and you know, is it showing up on curriculums, and you know, where is it on curriculums? You mentioned that over the last decade, you have been in, well, for more than that, 22 years, I think you said you've been instructing young people who are going into the profession of teaching. And over the last decade, it has been taught through the lens of critical race theory. So then, thank you for confirming that it actually exists. And so I guess we don't really need to question whether it exists or not, or whether it exists in the state of Ohio. You're verifying that yes, indeed, it does exist now and has existed for the last decade, correct?
May I answer that? Yes. I'm confirming that it does exist in universities. In my experiences in an education department, and the influence is on young people who aspire to be educators and are in our schools, but for 10 years, so they're in our schools now as teachers.
Follow up?
So then, although the words critical race theory may not show up on a document in a school district or on a board of education, local board of education, because young people are being taught how to be teachers through the lens of critical race theory, do you believe that this theory is being weaved throughout curriculum in subject matters without, even if it's not listed specifically as critical race theory?
I would respond to that as, and you're asking me what I believe, so it's not in a statistical evaluation of any kind, but it's my experience that one is a culmination of everything that they've experienced and they've been taught. And in a university situation, my young people are, and let me reiterate, I love teaching and interacting with these young people, and it's on a branch campus. They are very invested because they're working 2 jobs to pay their tuition. They've graduated from high school possibly not thinking that their shadow will ever darken the door of a school again, but a couple years of work experience, they're back. And I have some career people who have degrees in other careers, and they're so impassioned about what they are involved in that they want to share that with students so they're back for their licensure degrees. So this group of people, they're so invested in learning to be an educator. Yes, I would think that the way they are taught to examine issues is the way that they will teach to examine issues.
Okay. Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much for coming up tonight. Not being an educator myself, I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the idea of sort of, this, and maybe this isn't like classifying it the right way, but this sort of like one size fits all approach, because I would imagine whether you are teaching, small kids, high school students, or preparing, the next generation to be teachers, that you have to, that there is some nuance in, where people start their coursework. And so when we think about critical race theory and just sort of the differences in lived experience and trying to help our next generation of educators to be as passionate about teaching and to enjoy it as much as you do, I'm wondering to me, how do you sort of fit all of that together? So how do you give our next generation of teachers the tools they need to acknowledge that maybe all of their students aren't arriving at the same space? Because I know in your testimony, you had talked about, people just sort of coming from different places and spaces and things like that. But I just wonder if we aren't going to acknowledge, some of the things we carry with us when we're going along on life's journey, if that helps or if that hurts as we're trying to prepare these educators to be our teachers of the present and future.
If critical race theory helps or hurts?
Can I clarify that, Mr. Chairman? Thank you. Yeah, so, I mean, I just wonder if acknowledging that, you know, because teachers, in my experience, and you can talk better than this, teachers always have a wide variety of students that they come across with a lot of different backgrounds, and especially teaching at a branch campus, I can imagine that you come across folks from all walks of life. And so I just wonder, you know, is it helpful if we try to look at things through a lens and to acknowledge some of the challenges that folks might have had to get them where they are, and then to help better situate them to succeed in the future?
Through the chair to the representative, I would say that, just like in this chamber, there are many different experiences and lenses coming in to examine the issue of critical race theory based on your personal experiences and things you've encountered in your lives, which inform your decision making. Teachers any group of teachers are the same way. It's a general subgroup of the population, and so are our student teachers. So in acknowledging the differences that we all bring into an environment, but focusing on the sole difference when we examine issues, the sole lens would be critical race theory, I think we're doing a disservice. We're neglecting all those different experiences and lenses that we all bring to the environment and saying, no, this is the only lens we'll use. Yes, I think that's detrimental. I think it's limiting.
Follow up?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess following up on that, even if we're not saying, you know, solely critical race theory is the only lens that we can look through when we go through this, I wonder, should it be part of it, though? Should it be part of the approach to acknowledge that, you know, there are systems that work differently for people and folks like that? So I'm just wondering, in terms of, like, because, you know, when teachers have to go through a ton of education in order to become teachers, and so I just wonder if we're talking about a well-rounded perspective and a well-rounded education, is it appropriate for critical race theory, maybe not to be the only lens, but a lens?
And through the chair to the representative, I hope I'm doing this, responding to this well. Yes, as we teach essentialism or classicalism or progressivism, there is a philosophy of critical race theory. That's part of offering an accurate and complete education, accurate history. But to attribute looking at everything through a lens of critical race theory is denying our students the ability to do their own thinking. And it's damaging to separate people and to attribute their only value by something as cosmetic as the color of my skin, not my intellect or my character, the way that I look at the world through progressivism or through essentialism or perennialism. Critical race theory is a way of looking at things. The lens of critical race theory is the way of looking at things, as is those other philosophical lenses. So yes, there should be an acknowledgement that it exists, but it should not limit the way we allow our students to view history.
Thank you. All right. Let's see, no further questions. Thank you again for your testimony this evening. I'm going to just give a lineup of three names, just so you know who's coming up next. So we're going to start with Kathy Johnson, and then we'll go to Jonathan Broadbent, and then Linda Harvey. So I just want you to know what the lineup will be. Kathy Johnson, welcome, and begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Chair Wiggum, Vice Chair John, Ranking Member Kelly, and members of the Ohio House State and Local Government Committee. My name is Kathy Johnson. I'm Assistant Ohio State Director for Proclaiming Justice to the Nations. Thank you for the opportunity to present proponent testimony on House Bill 327, legislation that will require that Ohio prohibit teaching, advocating, or promoting divisive concepts. As a strong supporter of House Bill 327, I will speak to the substitute bill, which I encourage this committee to bring to the House floor. The Declaration of Independence, the forward vision of our founding fathers according to the laws of nature and of nature's God, asserts that all men are created equal. To these immortal words and a list of grievances with King George, our founders pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. Subsequently, Americans would fight and die in a bloody civil war and engage in long-fought political struggles intended to bring freedom and equality of opportunity to all Americans. Indeed, these struggles led to great reforms such as abolition, women's suffrage, and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stated in 1963, and I heard him when he said it, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." Reverend Dr. King believed that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were promissory notes to all Americans. This nation, while historically imperfect, has achieved greatness among nations and has strived for personal freedom, security, and prosperity. We stand ever closer to the vision of our founders and of Reverend Dr. King to be fully realized. Yet, division has become a prominent and dangerous ideology in our schools, universities, agencies, and beyond. It is identity politics, some call it critical race theory, by intentional promotion of cultural Marxism that threatens to subvert the progress and hope of this great nation. This is a movement to pound out the pillars of unity, faith, family, and love of country. Identity politics defines people by their racial and social groups and emphasizes collectivism and de-emphasizes individuality. The dogma of identity politics arranges and ranks people according to their perceived privilege and power. This ideology divides people into oppressor and oppressed groups and uses the concept of intersectionality to promote the idea that all perceived oppressed victim groups are interconnected. Identity politics also advances the backward-looking notion that the United States is a fundamentally racist and oppressive nation. Within identity politics, equity is a term that has been borrowed to promote equality of outcome rather than equality of opportunity. Moreover, stressing racial and social divisions artificially perpetuate the very ideas we seek to abandon, that minority groups are oppressed by a white majority. While racism has not been totally eradicated, most Americans find it abhorrent. It is unconscionable that these concepts are being taught to children today. It is morally unjust that white children are assigned guilt for the sins of their forefathers, while minority children are taught a paralyzing mentality of victimhood. Identity politics promotes racial grievance, pits children who really should be playing together against each other, fosters mistrust, and teaches them disdain for America. Simply put, identity politics is racism. All Americans are heirs to the vision of our founders and must be encouraged to seize the abundant opportunities that this great nation affords to them. Individual responsibility and industry are essential parts of this success. There is an urgency to this bill due in part to a recent proposed rule change by the U.S. Department of Education that prioritizes these controversial concepts in American history and civics education. This proposed rule change was objected to in a letter dated May 19, 2021, and signed by 20 state attorneys general, including Ohio Attorney General David Yost. Sub-Bill 327 comprehensively defines the divisive concepts that are at play in our schools, universities, and agencies. I am grateful to Representatives Grandel and Fowler Arthur for their diligent efforts to bring this accurate and comprehensive bill before this committee, and to the many co-sponsors who have supported and joined their efforts.
Thank you for your testimony. Are you able to take questions today?
Of course.
Okay. Do we have questions from the committee? Representative Kelly?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one question. Thank you so much for coming in today. In your testimony, when you talk about how equity is a term borrowed to promote equality of outcome rather than equality of opportunity, I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about whether you feel like there are equal opportunities for everyone in our community, everyone in our state, everyone across this country, or if you think that we maybe need to be thoughtful about creating more equity so eventually we can all have that equal opportunity that you talked about in your testimony.
We certainly want to see equal opportunity. We want to see unity across our nation, in this state, and in our communities. I believe that in the past, there was not an opportunity, but as I said in my testimony, I believe that we've made great progress as a nation. It may have taken too long, but I believe we've made great progress, and that we stand, I believe, at a time when our citizens, our American citizens, abhor racism, and that we stand at a time, if not interrupted, that we will see more unity, that we will see complete opportunities for all Americans. And I believe that structurally, I believe our institutions have come a very long way. And if there is little to none of institutions that are actually against people today.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for that. So just following up on that last piece of your question, so do you feel like sort of institutionally that we're in a place right now where that kind of like structural racism doesn't exist? Do you feel like we are where we need to be, or do you feel like we have farther to go?
There's always room to grow in anything like this. However, I think we are a pretty good place, and I think there is racism. I believe that it is more on an individual basis.
Seeing no further questions, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
We have now with us Jonathan Broadbent. Welcome, and proceed whenever you're ready.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Chairman Wiggum, Vice Chair John, Ranking Member Kelly, and members of the Ohio House, State, and Local Government Committee. I appreciate the members of this committee hearing and proponent testimony on House Bill 327, legislation declaring that Ohio prohibit teaching, advocating, or promoting divisive concepts. As chair and team lead of Protect Ohio Children, I recognized the need in March of this year to create an anonymous resource for parents, teachers, and community members to voice their concerns over the teaching of critical race theory in public schools in Ohio. I then became involved with Protect Ohio Children, an Ohio-based organization with a website that I'll refer to in a moment. In March, my mobile number was distributed. People received my email address. I gave anonymous tipsters nicknames, including, starting with my home school district of Beechwood. My very first tipster is Beechwood Teacher A. I have no idea who this person is, but they've communicated extensively with me over the past few months. I created anonymous drop boxes and then provided an opportunity to upload content, video, copies of tests, screen captures, you name it. I have received cell phone images, video, audio, and over 100 pages of written accounts from school districts. These come from students, teachers, administrative staff, parents, grandparents, and taxpayers. The only identifying piece of information I receive is the school district. I make sure of that because I want to protect the identities of those people who are willing to step forward. I assumed the role of voice for people in the community who were concerned about stepping up and stepping to the microphone as I have today. I've done this in school districts all over Northeast Ohio for the past 4 months. I've created write-ups of many of the accounts I've received and distributed those to the 5 distribution lists that I now manage on behalf of Protect Ohio Children, and sometimes exclusively to members of that school district community. I have then communicated those back to school boards and superintendents for comment. When possible, I've communicated, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead here. Not one school district admits to utilizing critical race theory. Every school district denies it, and now it's become part and parcel. Many school board meetings are beginning with a proclamation that CRT is not being utilized in the school district. I attended one where on video, the superintendent announced that he had no idea what CRT was and thought it was a political ploy. 6 minutes later on the video, a senior from the high school approached the podium and thanked the school district for utilizing critical race theory. From those early days, we now have Protect Ohio Children website, which has gone online with something we call a heat map. It's showing 613 school districts in the state of Ohio and is linking evidence as it comes in. The evidence is pouring in at an unbelievable rate. If permissible, I have 2 pieces of additional information that I intend to attach to this that have arrived since I arrived in this room, have been brought to my attention. The reason people wish to be anonymous, it all boils down to one thing: intimidation. They feel that either they or their children will be ostracized for speaking out, or they may be attacked at their place of work. So Protect Ohio Children provides them with that voice. I've heard several requests today for tangible, viable information pertaining to the use of critical race theory in school districts. I have purchased a 7 terabyte external hard drive, and it's filling up. We now have all of that. It's being parsed by our lawyers and is going live on 613 school districts in the state of Ohio. Anybody wishing to see evidence, visit protectohiochildren.net. It's going live on the website, and you're going to see critical race theory, comprehensive sexual education, and social emotional learning targeted in each of those districts with live links to examples and information. I have selected 2 anecdotal pieces of evidence to bring to the board today. One is a high school-aged student I was alerted to who is accustomed to receiving all A's. It's a high-achieving student, received a B on a paper. The student was asked by the teacher, asked the teacher about the B and was led into the hallway. The answer given was, by the teacher, "You'll never understand because you won the lottery. You were born white in America." That's a byproduct of critical race theory teaching in schools.
Mr. Broadbent,
yes.
The 5 minutes is up, but I would like to ask you, are you going to the second? Do you want to do the second? You had two things that you were going to describe.
Yes.
I'll ask you, my question would be, could you describe the second then?
Okay.
Thank you.
In one school district, there's a parent-teacher organization that is comprised mostly of activist parents who create content on current controversial topics such as body image, race, gender, and sexuality. Every month, a period is selected, maybe first, second, or third, and all other class periods are shortened in that day. And the content provided by the PTA is to be taught. Teachers who balk or ask questions are told that they and say that they're not trained to address such issues, are told that they can either walk or and do the teaching, or they'll be penalized. One of the pieces of evidence that I'll be submitting as a follow-up to today's conversation is a PowerPoint slide that's been extracted from one of those meetings. Chair Wiggum, in specific reference to that school district in particular has been asking questions for months about this content and is being told that because it comes from the PTA, they don't have to disclose it. We also have a school district that's been asking for curriculum and being deferred. Instead of receiving an answer from their school district, they're being deferred to the Diversity Center of Northeast Ohio, who is telling the parents that it's proprietary information and they can't release it.
Okay. A question from Representative Fowler Arthur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Broadbent, for your testimony. I just was wondering, on the website, is it specific to schools and school district information, or have you also had any information from employees or employers about their concerns? Because House Bill 327 includes not only the educational space, but also the employment space for state and local government. And I know in Cuyahoga County they had passed a resolution, and I'd gotten feedback of concerns of employees who were feeling that it would endanger their position if they were to say that they had a concern about the training. I didn't know if your heat map might include anything outside of the school space.
No, Protect Ohio Children is focused exclusively on K through 12. I personally have gotten involved in some college campuses. I have some information there as well, but to answer your, through the chair to the representative, pardon me. I have some additional information, but as it pertains to employers, I do not have the answer to that question.
Okay, Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming in. I am checking out your website. And so I guess two questions in one, so I apologize for that. I was just wondering, the information that you talked about on your hard drive, if that was going to be then publicly available on the website. So that would be the first part. And then the second part was I'm looking at the map with the red and yellow, where the red has the confirmed evidence and the yellow is under a watch status. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that yellow status means.
Certainly. Through the chair to the representative, as this information comes into our three districts in Ohio, we have Protect Ohio North, Protect Ohio Central, and Protect Ohio Southern. I cover personally 204 districts in northern Ohio. As word spreads of our availability, we are receiving a deluge of information. We have to parse through that and make sure there's no personally identifiable information that's contained in those posts before they go live. We're also verifying those pieces of information to make sure that they're legitimate and attaching to district or districts, plural. The answer to the second part of your question, Representative, it is our intention to make each and every piece of that possible, live and available, primarily for the purpose of parents finding out where this stuff is and doing what they feel is in the best interests of their children.
Okay. Representative John.
Through the chair, thank you, Mr. Broadbent, for being here. So just clarification following Representative Fowler Arthur's question regarding employment and employers. So teachers are employees, and so your example, your second example that you gave as a response to the chair, so just to clarify, teachers who object to teaching this information coming from the parent-teacher organization, they're being told they could be disciplined as an employee for objecting to teaching it. Is that what I heard? You said penalized, and I just want to make sure that we're clear that their employment status they're being told they could be disciplined as an employee for refusing.
That is, through the chair to the representative, that is absolutely correct. It's our understanding, and we have verified evidence of people who have been intimidated, threatened. They've approached both school board and union heads and received derogatory and negative response. We also have some indication that, and we don't know yet, but I am encouraging bringing some lawyers in to explore some recent dismissals of school staff that may or may not prove to be related to their reluctance to teach this material.
Mr. broadband on your website. When we go there, then we'll be able to find out, because it's very interesting. You're saying that the union's not protecting the teachers in this case. And you have evidence maybe of that?
To the chair, it's my understanding from a broad series of conversations with a great number of teachers now who are deciding to be whistleblower that the union is not supporting anything that counters critical race theory. It's my understanding further that unions are supportive of this material. That is anecdotal. That is my personal observation. I can't verify with certainty.
Representative Fowler Arthur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So continuing on this questioning about the teacher's experience, I had a couple teachers that reached out to me. I asked them to come today, and they expressed the same concern that they would send written testimony anonymously only. And I was concerned about that, but they shared something similar. I just wondered, have any of them shared with you professional development resources or concerns about the professional development resources that they're going through? Because one of the teachers I spoke with, that was their main concern, was in material that they were being required to receive training in and then expected to pass on to their students.
Absolutely. Through the chair to the representative, I'll start with something that is particularly problematic for me and my family, and that is the awareness that school teacher continuing education now has a strong component of anti-cop. That, to me, makes my blood boil. Forgive me that personal commentary. I don't believe that there should be any anti-police teaching to school teachers. I don't believe that has a place in schools. To answer your question, yes, I've had an array of conversations with school teachers who are concerned for their jobs. I'm sorry, I want to ask for a repeat of the question. I think I may have gotten myself off topic.
Clarify, if you would, Representative.
Thank you. It was around professional development resources.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for bringing me back onto topic. Through the chair to the representative. Yes, we have an array of information that's come in from teachers pertaining to continuing education, including videos where teachers are told that if they're white, they need to go home and really assess their value systems, the country, America, and where their white privilege comes from. That they, as teachers, I have video of this and audio from teacher training, that they are to specifically assess their white privilege.
Okay. Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I guess the obvious question is, if all this information is coming in anonymously and it's in teacher preparation, how are you looking at to verify that it's not coming from out of state or that it's not from a website and that it's truly actually something that the teacher is being required to participate in or instruct? Do you have a process that you use to verify that that information that they're providing is factual?
To the chair, to the representative, yes, we've talked extensively about that, and that's part of the reason that we're cautious. We do not want to put anything up that we are not absolutely certain of. So we're moving slowly with that content, but we're bringing more people in to vet that and walk through steps of verification. So far, we've been fairly fortunate because we know the grapevine, we know the network of connection that has put us in touch with that teacher or administrator or student who's been whistleblower. For instance, with students, we may know the parents. And with parents, we can use the story of their student, but remove any names or identifying information. If there's video, we want to go through and make sure there's not anything identifiable in the video, like somebody's lapel pin or anything along that line. But it's some of the content is easier to verify than others. It's our objective that anything you see there will be absolutely certain and thoroughly vetted.
Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a follow-up to some of the conversation we were having before. So I think one, just for the committee's information, I think we'll probably be able to actually hear it straight from the unions at some point in this process to get some more clarification on that. But I was wondering, when the teachers have the objections, is it over things like training they have to go to or things that they're being recommended to read, or is it over things that they're being assigned to teach?
Through the chair to the representative, all of the above.
Follow up?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so is all of that included on the information that is going to be included on your website?
Through the chair to the representative, no. That it does not fall in the category of direct tangible evidence unless, for instance, there is video or audio of that experience or written testimony from that teacher in that circumstance.
Thank you. Okay. Seeing no further questions, thank you for your testimony this evening.
Thank you.
And we have next with us will be Linda Harvey, and then we have Lisa Woods, and then Kathy Poltz. So, Ms. Harvey, welcome.
Thank you, members of the House, State, and Local Government Committee, Chairman Wiggum, and representatives. My name is Linda Harvey. I am president of Mission America. I am also affiliated in the larger network, as Jonathan was, of the Protect Ohio Children Network. I stand as a fervent proponent of House Bill 327, and the reason is because schools in Ohio and throughout the country are exploding with parents rightfully objecting to bigoted, racist lessons their children are being taught. You've heard some examples already. These lessons convey inaccurate, illegal concepts to children. And by illegal, I mean they encourage what is now racial discrimination under Ohio law. That is, that you discriminate based on race or color or national origin. These are also illegal policies in most every school district that I've come into contact with. So think about that. Such lessons present extremely poor examples to our youngest Americans. So what child is helped by being told to judge all people by the shallow characteristic of skin color? To immediately put each person they meet in a box with no other information. Doesn't anyone see this as clearly a road to tyranny and possible violence against other people? Our schools are telling children of color to view all their fellow students, their teachers, their teammates, those in their churches, their neighborhoods who are white with suspicion, and to believe all people of color, including themselves, are mostly victims. This is not only a recipe for cultural chaos and division, it is a shallow, huge lie. It's a lie. The Ohio State Board of Education last summer, 2020, passed a resolution encouraging Ohio schools to evaluate themselves for evidence of white privilege and systemic racism. A group of more thoughtful board members tried to talk some sense into those who were easily swayed by the racially charged narrative sweeping our country, but the majority simply had to go ahead with this resolution. And now, the board president has suppressed any more public comments on this issue because the discussion makes some board members uncomfortable. Are these professionals? Sure doesn't sound like it to me. These actions are wrong, and I'm hoping that House Bill 327 passes and then will automatically invalidate that resolution, which is rooted in stereotyping and bigotry, although it claims to be the opposite. This is not DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, as the many pricey consultants now being hired in our schools are claiming. It's another DEI, division, exclusion, and intolerance. And any school that claims otherwise is lying to parents, teachers, and students. When did we stop judging people by the content of one's character and not the color of a person's skin? When I hear the claim of white privilege, I want to, and not in a funny way, I want to laugh, thinking about what my mom would say. My mother died in 2007. But she, a white woman, grew up in the Depression in a family of 5 children with an alcoholic father who ended up going to prison during her childhood. My mom not only never had her own bedroom or even bed or even her own dresser drawer, but her few belongings were contained in a cardboard box. She had to wear her mother's clothes to school at age 12. She was told by her family she would have to repeat the 7th grade because they did not have enough money to pay for books and supplies for both her and her brother. Nevertheless, when my mom died, she owned her own home with no mortgage. She had no car payments. She donated to charity and her church. She even managed to leave a little money to her 2 children. And she was the first person I ever knew to defend black people. She could not stand people using the N-word, and she made sure I grew up knowing that was always wrong. She had compassion because of her background, which was not white privilege. I believe I speak for what my mom would have said, that we can't let shysters and connivers redefine what it means to have true equality in this country. We must go back to Martin Luther King, and not to those who would call for a new era of discrimination, who would falsely label our flag here at the 4th of July. And we're going to see much more of that labeling as a symbol of so-called racism. We must raise up a better standard and keep the worthy values of America, proclaiming true unity, liberty, and justice for all. And this bill is infused with these timeless American values, and that's why I support it.
Okay. Thank you for your testimony.
327. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Do we have questions from the committee? Representative Fowler Arthur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Harvey, for driving up. So you made a comment that based on the Civil Rights Act, the teaching of concepts that have been laid out in critical race theory may already be illegal.
Right.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that rationale, and also on whether or not the provision that we have in the bill that we want to teach about them, if that looks different in your mind from a legality perspective?
I don't know what you mean by the second part is teaching about them, but
the bill specifically allows teaching about divisive concepts rather than promoting divisive concepts.
Right. There is no reason not to teach about different opposing views and the history, validated, objective history of racial segregation, for instance, and all of that. What should not be there is the idea that we are to self-evaluate, as if this is just one more way in which schools are trying to be, massive psychologists in the place of parents, and everyone is to divide themselves by identity politics. And that, 6-year-old Megan, who happens to be a child of color, is automatically going to feel terrible because she really liked her white classmates, and she's going to be thinking, I should be, backing away from them. Or if she's white, she'll automatically feel huge guilt. I mean, this is a recipe for instability. Anyway, so I didn't address the first part of your question, that we should be teaching our kids that no, it is against the law and it is against school policy to encourage this kind of thing, and it can lead to illegalities down the road. So.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also just wanted to ask you a little bit. You shared your experience with your mother,
yes.
And obviously her influence had a significant impact on your view of people of different backgrounds. Right. I want to ask you the same question I asked the woman that spoke earlier about parents' role in this. What if we do have a parent who is promoting discriminatory practice toward their classmates of different ethnicities? How would you propose, or do you see the school having a role in that? What do you propose would be an appropriate way of helping them understand that they're treating someone inappropriately?
I was a middle school teacher a number of decades ago, and a third of my students were African American or people of color. And one of the things that is very important to me is to continue to go back to what I just said before, go back to fact-based teaching. Teach about the history of our country. If you teach about desegregation in the South and you have a child sitting there whose parents at home are telling them that they should discriminate based on color, they automatically, the general self-revelation is to question your own, what you have been taught. Teaching about facts will bring that to bear for most kids. And again, I think we need to avoid being, cosmic psychologists for kids.
Okay, seeing no further questions, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next we have, I'll just say we have Lisa Woods, Kathy Poltz, Jen Burr, and Dakota Sawyer. In that order, we'll start with Lisa Woods, and I just want to make a reminder to everyone that we have just a 5-minute testimony, so just make sure we focus on the things.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman Wiggum, Vice Chair John, Ranking Member Kelly, and members of the committee. My name is Lisa Woods. I'm the mother of 5 children, including a special needs child and 2 children serving in the United States Armed Forces. I have a strong background in education from a parent's perspective. I served as an elected member of the Ohio State Board of Education, an amazing experience and one that allowed me to help shape policy for the school children of Ohio, including my own. I come to you to testify as a proponent of both 327 and 322, which are unfortunately needed to foster a positive educational environment in Ohio. Actions taken by the state board last year, which launched an initiative in school districts across Ohio, spending time, treasure, and talent, misleading Ohio school children on unproven and factually inaccurate theories, pitting Ohioans against Ohioan, taking up valuable classroom time, and missing the main point of our education system, which is critical thinking and specific knowledge to succeed as citizens. What is good for my children is clearly good for all of school children in Ohio. We need to teach them truths, proven concepts to utilize practical learning measurements to ensure that they achieve the required academic levels necessary to earn their high school diploma. Last July, a resolution was passed by the Board of Education in haste, and frankly, with almost no public input nor consultation. Resolution 20 was wide-reaching and has set local boards of education into spending considerable time and effort to do exactly what Dr. Martin Luther King preached against, promoting bias, non-objective, and unproven theories about history and race relations that are the subject of my testimony today. 5 members of the board stood against this resolution, and the resolution set off a firestorm of controversy that continues to this day, necessitating the need for thoughtful and reasoned legislation to put a stop to the barrage of mistruths, disproven theories, and mistruths to be thrust upon our Ohio school children. We have a school report card system that has been broken for a decade. Ohio's Common Core curriculum, no matter what euphemism they choose to call it, is weak and not properly preparing children for their future. What critics are calling a lost school year with very limited classroom learning is coming to a conclusion, and professionals of all stripes fret that our children may have been set back years because of it. Amidst all of this, the priorities of the State Board and hundreds of local school districts have become skewed to ignore these elephants in the room and have begun to confuse our school children even more by propagating false accusations about people based on their skin color and a warped and false version of the founding and history of our country, which flies in the face of hundreds of years of known truths. Ohio's education system must strive for truth and teach truth to our school children. The teaching of truth must be, at all times, a priority of Ohio policy. Across Ohio and the nation, parents in large numbers are going to school board meetings and sounding off about truth. Schools that are following protocols like Ohio Board of Education Resolution 20 are not teaching truths. In fact, they are incorporating the mistruths into curricula and miseducating children and indoctrinating them into a truly un-American ideology not based on fact. 1619 Project, a debunked mistruth, is still listed as a suggested teaching aid on the Ohio Department of Education website. 1619 is a failed attempt to claim that the United States of America, founded 157 years before our actual foundation and founded strictly as a racist, greedy country focused on slave trade. That flies in the face of all known facts. Current curricula correctly chronicled the foundation of the United States, its history as a colony, and examine in great detail the scourge of slavery and the efforts to eradicate it. If ODE is recommending the 1619 Project as a teaching aid, you can bet it is being taught. In this very building where Abraham Lincoln's bust stands, the great emancipator, the man who literally gave his life for his country over the issues of civil rights for Black Americans, the 1619 Project lies about Lincoln and discredits him and his abolitionist supporters, making spurious claims about the Lincoln administration, all of which are debunked by actual scholarly truth.
Ms. Woods, we are at 5 minutes. Would you be willing to take questions
Yes.
in the committee?
Thank you.
Okay. Representative Golonsky.
Thank you to the chair, and thank you very much for coming here with your years of experience. We do benefit from that. And so in that regard, my question is about the curriculum being taught in schools before 2019. So if you can answer that, were they teaching, or was American exceptionalism being taught? And if so, do you consider that to be indoctrination?
Well, because we do have local control, it's very difficult to know and understand what's being taught throughout all the districts.
Follow up?
Thank you.
Okay. Representative Kelly.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I just didn't know if you could see me out of your peripheral vision. Thank you for coming in, for testifying today. I was just reading sort of farther down into your testimony where you talked about how systematic racism is an outright lie. And so I was wondering if you could talk more about that. We heard some testimony on a different bill earlier that just has a little bit of a different perspective. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that piece that's a little bit farther down in your testimony toward like the top middle of page 4.
Thank you. Organized racism, which is really what critical race theory is, starts out subtly. It starts out with outrageous lies that become more outrageous as they go along. Systemic racism is one of those outright lies. In order for Ohio to have committed the crime of systemic racism, a system of racism has to have been set in place by either law, rule, or practice. In all of our history, Ohio has never done this and currently does not do this. No U.S. Supreme Court decision has ever held Ohio law or rule to be part of a system of racism. The same cannot be said of the 13 U.S. states where slavery was legal, but Ohio is not one of those. In our long history since 1803, Ohio has always granted equal rights to people regardless of race. The Northwest Territory explicitly stated that slavery was not legal nor to be tolerated, and Ohio was a crown gem of the Underground Railroad and proudly involved in the abolition movement. Ohio's votes elected Lincoln and abolitionist Republicans to office to right the wrongs of the southern states.
And can I ask a follow-up
Yes,
on that?
follow
Sorry,
up.
I apologize for interrupting you, because the piece that I really wanted to sort of dig into a little bit more is this idea by law, rule, or practice. Because I think sometimes systems can be set up in a way that is sort of inherently inequitable for everyone in our community. And so I just wasn't sure if you thought that even though, Ohio in the 1800s, you talk about that in your testimony, but do you think that now, that it's still true now that systemic racism doesn't exist in Ohio?
It would have to be a system of racism, which I do not believe we have here in Ohio. One false claim states that the nation's war on drugs is actually racist because black people are arrested and convicted of drug offenses more than white people. This General Assembly wrote those laws, and they apply to everyone. If the laws that you wrote were discriminatory, they would not have been struck down by would they not have been struck down by the courts? Would you not have gone back and altered them? The reality is that the war on drugs is an attempt to keep all citizens, regardless of race, safe from the dangers of addiction, literally spreading death into our communities. These laws protect all Ohioans equally. That is just one example.
Okay. Any other questions by the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony this evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Next, we have Kathy Poltz. We will move on. If Kathy's not here, we'll move on to Jen Burr.
I can tell you she's not here.
Okay. Dakota Sawyer. Okay. Linda Harvey. Hari. Oh, we just had her. Yeah, I'm looking her up too. Ann Robbins. Welcome.
Yes. Chairman Wiggum, Vice Chair John, Ranking Member Kelly, and honorable members of the House, State, and Local Government Committee. My name is Ann Robbins, and I am speaking on behalf of the Rocky River Citizens for Transparency. There is no question in my mind that critical race theory is being taught under the guise of social justice education in our Rocky River school system. Today, you've heard testimony by parents who have seen the written curriculum being taught by the Diversity Center of Northeast Ohio, the DCNEO. It is a curriculum that clearly shows the tenets of critical race theory. And today, we have audio-taped evidence of that curriculum by way of an actual classroom teaching by a DCNEO instructor to a 9th grade class at Rocky River High School. The name of the class is Diversity 101. A student who wishes to remain anonymous presented us with the audio tape from 2018. The instructor tells the students that society is separated into groups, a dominant group and a subordinate group. The dominant group is born into a world that is organized to benefit and suit their needs. They enjoy unearned privileges, and they enjoy these privileges because of their group identity. The instructor then goes on to explain that the dominant group makes the rules about our world, what we can and cannot do, rules about access to resources and behavior. The subordinate group is identified as minorities. They are described with terms like abnormal, deviant. And who exactly does the instructor identify as the dominant group? It is the white middle class. This, ladies and gentlemen, is Diversity 101. It is classic critical race theory explained to ninth graders. The audio file on this lesson can be found on our Rocky River Citizens for Transparency.org. I encourage you to go to our website and listen to it. This is a radical leftist political ideology, and it has no business being taught in our schools. It indoctrinates students to view society through the divisive lens of group identity. It completely disregards the American constitutional ideal of individualism. The critical social justice is a movement, and it has established itself in schools across the state of Ohio, and it needs to be exposed and removed before it poisons an entire generation. And I ask you to please vote to pass Ohio Bill 327.
Thank you for your testimony, and we have questions from the committee. Representative Fowler Arthur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. I was just wondering whether you were familiar if this class was perhaps an extra credit class or an AP class, or if it was actually part of the curriculum for graduation, if you had any additional information.
It is my understanding this is a class for all ninth graders, incoming freshmen to our high school. And it's not an AP class. It's just a standard class that everybody takes in the school.
Okay. Seeing no further questions from the committee, thank you for your testimony this evening. Next we have Elizabeth McAdams. And then we'll do Paul Walton after that. Welcome.
Chairman Wiggum, Vice Chair John, and Ranking Member Kelly, and members of the State and Local Government Committee. I am testifying today to support House Bill 327 to prohibit teaching, advocating, or promoting divisive concepts within our school districts, community schools, STEM schools, and state agencies. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines racism as a belief that race is a fundamental determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority. The critical race theory is a system that considers how our historical laws and social structures impact the preservation of racial inequality. This concept would be considered racist because we are teaching our future generation that the color of their skin not only defines who they were, but who they can be. After attention was brought to me that a local school was using the book Stamped by Jason Reynolds, I took it upon myself to read the book and understand what all the contention was about. I was appalled to find that it was deemed acceptable to teach these children that all white people are racists, and even minorities who didn't agree with this theory are also racist, or at the very least wrong in how they believe. When was it decided that it was okay to stop teaching facts in our school and begin teaching moral relativity? The job of our public school system is to teach historical fact. It is primarily the parents' role to fit these facts into a moral framework for our students. That is what CRT is doing, and it is wrong to allow our taxpayers' money to create an indoctrination camp. I am not ignorant to the fact that racism exists, but teaching our children that everything we think and feel is because of racism is ridiculous. As a child, I may have been used to different hair colors, glasses, freckles, and other subtle differences, but a completely different skin color can be quite confusing if you've never seen it, just like someone missing a leg, covered in tattoos, dressed as a nun, and so on. But that doesn't make a person racist or prejudiced for staring or feeling uncomfortable. It just means that we need to continue to teach our children that we may look different on the outside,
but we all bleed red on the inside. We all have different challenges that we have to overcome. We can all be a victim of something in our lives, whether racism, abuse, robbery, bullying, etc. This country was founded by people who were willing to overcome as opposed to sulk in their circumstances. How can we teach our children to become victors if all we feed them is how terrible their circumstances are and that nothing can change it? The CRT is an attempt to rewrite our history so that we can be ashamed and defeated and no longer proud to be Americans. How will we ever stand strong as a nation if we allow our school systems to teach our future generation that this country was founded on hate and lies? Martin Luther King Jr. said, hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Where is the love in this divisive concept? Thank you for hearing my testimony.
Thank you for your testimony. We have questions from the committee. Seeing none, again, thank you. Do we have a poll? I can't tell if it's Witten or Whiten. Okay. Colleen Scheider? Thank you. You almost got me.
Chair Wiggum, Vice Chair John, Ranking Member Kelly, and members of the Ohio State and Local Government Committee, I appreciate the members of this committee hearing Proponent testimony on House Bill 327, legislation declaring that Ohio prohibit teaching, advocating, or promoting divisive concepts. Thank you for allowing me to be here. In the interest of respecting the chair's request to get to the meat of this, you all have my written testimony, so I'm going to pare it down a little bit. I reside in and have a student in the Kings Local School District in Warren County. That's near Kings Island, where critical race theory is being taught. I work with a concerned group of citizens known as the Kings Community for Education Integrity. I have 2 children. One hopes to be an educator. The other wishes to be a police officer. I worry about the divisive nature of CRT and the damage it's doing to our students, our teachers, to race relations. I worry and pray for our community, my son's fellow officers, for our current officers, and for my son's future, as I see the country and our community that my son and I love so deeply become more and more divided and hostile, and therefore potentially more dangerous for a police officer in particular. I believe critical race theory is a key factor in what we see happening. Critical race theory, as we've heard today, is Marxist, it's politically activist, it's a movement, and this is undisputed by its earliest proponents from the 70s, such as Derek Bell. The last gentleman that provided testimony on 322 did a fantastic job of explaining exactly what CRT is, so I won't even try. I trust each one of you will diligently continue to research this. In our school district, we are just beginning to uncover the extent to which critical race theory is embedded into our curriculum. By curriculum, I mean everything from books the students are required to read and the assignments they're required to complete, to the training of the staff, teachers, and administrators. Our concerns about critical race theory began around January when the first parent brought the book stamped Racism, Anti-Racism, and You, a remix of the book stamped from the beginning by Ibram X. Kendi to our attention. The book was required reading for 3 advanced level English classes in our high school. The classes were classified as elective, but as I understand it, the only English 4 advanced, as I understand it, they were all of the English 4 classes available for advanced students had this as required curriculum. We had over 130 students just this past year that read it as required curriculum. One of the parents of those students came to us because her child expressed serious concerns about its content. The student recognized and thought it to be racist, divisive, anti-American, historically inaccurate, political, and most troubling for her, anti-Christian. In addition, we learned from other families that the Black Lives Matter flag is being promoted in our school district and in our classrooms, becoming part of critical race theory programming. We brought it to the concerns of our Board of Education, and for months we were met with silence. Recently, a board member spoke up. He'd read the book, and he came to the same conclusions as the student had come to. He posed questions to our board and our administration as to our district policies, how curriculum is developed, how it's reviewed and approved, and the process for removing curriculum once it is approved. And he apologized for the role he played in approving critical race theory in our school district through the book stamped. The backlash he received was intense. Accusations were made about the motive of his motives and of his character. He was accused of being racist. People called for a boycott of his business. I was told he received hundreds of emails and phone calls. And the hateful backlash he received was largely from community members calling themselves United Against Hate. Ironic. But it gets better. United Against Hate has a Facebook page that is administered by the same person designated as our district's community liaison to our district's official DEI committee. DEI, as we've talked today, stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Diversity of thought? Apparently not. Diversity or inclusion of others with opposing views? Definitely not. As you research, you'll find words like diversity, equity, and inclusion used throughout the teachings of critical race theory, but it's a misnomer, just like the name critical race theory itself. CRT doesn't seek to offer critical thinking. It seeks to offer one and only one point of view, one that says America is systemically racist, was founded on slavery at the hands of terrible people called Christians, and is ran on a racial class system in which all white people are oppressors and all people of color are oppressed. You heard testimony today.
Ms. Scheider, we are out of time. Would you be willing to take questions?
I will do my best.
Okay. Are there questions from our committee today? Representative Fowler Arthur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have one question, and that is related to, you do reference divisive concepts, and House Bill 327 doesn't specifically include the terminology critical race theory. It's really focused on the divisive concepts that may underpin that ideology along with perhaps other ideologies. Do you feel that if this bill were to pass, it would have a positive impact on your local district and how they are handling this issue? I'm just kind of wondering whether you think that it would help with that inclusiveness in the conversation.
Through the chair to the representative, thank you for your question. My group of concerned citizens are such fledglings in learning the depth of the divisive concepts being taught in our school district that I do believe this bill could have a positive impact, because I am still today hopeful until I uncover differently. I am hopeful that it is not embedded so deeply into our curriculum that the time and money resource that it would cost to revamp that could be minimized, because I'm hopeful that it's not so deep that it's just too late.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so just one follow-up, and you may still be uncovering this, but going to one of the questions that was asked earlier about length of time, are you familiar, if your son also went through this education system, was it the same when he went through, or are you seeing a change in a particular time? Do you think that the curriculum has changed recently?
Thank you for your question. I really can't speak to that. I did put my children into a homeschooling cooperative, so I can only speak really to what that program, especially in high school, provided. When my children personally were in school, and if you'll permit me a little leeway here, my children were not mainstream easy students. I had to watch my P's and Q's. I could not question the things that I may have found objectionable for fear of how that would impact my student. And I know we've heard other people here tonight say that they've had same concerns brought up by people, by themselves or by other people coming to them saying, you have a voice, would you please speak for me? And that tonight is what I hope to be. I hope to be a voice for people who, my children are graduated now, so I have a little bit, I feel like I have a little bit more leeway. And I'm hoping to encourage other people who have tangible evidence that they can come to you and say, yes, I've seen it. I've seen it with my younger daughter. I'm seeing it with my younger daughter, and I saw it 5 years ago with my older son. Because without those voices, sometimes the testimony is not as powerful.
Okay, any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next we have Juliette Tissot. Welcome.
Thank you. I've been listening to the debate on CRT for several months now, and I usually feel like a ping pong ball. One side saying it's in schools, the other side saying it's not. One side saying it's racism, the other side saying it's not. Well, I decided I didn't want to feel like a ping pong ball anymore, so I went to various districts all around Cincinnati. I talked to parents, I talked to students, I talked to teachers, I talked to school board members, and I got that hard, concrete evidence that you are asking about. And no, ma'am, it's not a rumor. One thing I wanted to decide for sure was it in the schools? The other thing I wanted to know was, did I approve of it? And the third thing I wanted to figure out was what I was going to do about it. I found out it is in the school. I do not approve, and I will continue to fight until it is outlawed and parents have recourse against teachers who abuse their children in the classroom. CRT wants to replace equality, which seeks to protect individual rights regardless of race, with equity, which seeks to divide the world into competing racial groups and ensure race-based equality of outcomes. In one elementary school, third graders were forced to deconstruct their racial and sexual identities, then rank themselves according to their power and privilege. Yes, I said third graders. In a middle school, teachers were forced to locate themselves on an oppression matrix, telling white, straight, English-speaking Christian males that they were members of the oppressive class. In Forest Hills, which someone else spoke about today, a teacher was caught on video in a classroom telling their student that he was racist and that he should check his white privilege. What brought that on, you might wonder? The student was defending the label Redskins for their mascot. He wasn't being rude or disrespectful, and he wasn't being racist. His position was simply that a sports team would not be named after something that the sports team didn't respect. And therefore, the sports team being named racist, they respected that name and the tribe. Well, the educator didn't agree, told him he was racist, told him to check his white privilege, and actually had him leave the room and sent him to the principal's office. Some education that child got that day. What was he taught? Don't step out of line, don't question authority, don't speak up, don't think for yourself, don't have an opinion, or you'll be punished. Is that what school has become? Is that what you'd hoped it'd be for the next generation? Conversation under critical race theory has all but shut down. Any disagreement with the radical teacher's opinion is labeled white fragility, unconscious bias, or internalized white supremacy. We're no longer teaching children how to think, we're teaching them what to think under critical race theory. In Loveland, the Loveland Middle School principal tweeted his own words from his official principal's account. "We must move beyond education to a place of activation." His words, the principal of the middle school. Nothing happened to him that day, even though I complained about that tweet. So 2 days later, he tweeted, and he tagged the middle school student body, to follow Ibram Kendi. Who is Ibram Kendi? Well, he's a black man. He's well educated. He's got a master's and a PhD. He also authored one of the most anti-American books called How to Be an Anti-Racist. It calls for the destruction of the racist capitalism system. He argues that the only remedy for past discrimination is future discrimination. He argues America is irredeemably racist and oppressive and must be torn down. Why on earth would we teach American children that this country's basis should be torn down? In college, Ibram Kendi said white people are a different breed of humans. That's a quote. Another scholar the principal encouraged students to follow is Cheryl Harris, and she advocates suspending private property rights, seizing land and wealth from the rich, and race-based redistribution. This is Loveland, about 20 minutes north of Cincinnati. Another school encouraged kids to draw with chalk in the parking lot. This was fall of 2020, so I guess it was socially relevant that they drew Black Lives Matter and a black fist on the ground. They were supposed to draw what they were considering to be society's problems. What I don't think was societally relevant at the time were the letters ACAB above BLM. If you don't know what ACAB means, it means all cops are bastards. I got this picture from a student. She participated in the drawing. She felt like she had to. She didn't want her friends to hate her teachers to be mad at her, or her grades to suffer. She also cried that day because her father is a police officer.
Ms. Tussaud, thank you for that testimony. Will you take questions now?
I will, and I have more examples if anyone wants them.
Okay. Do we have questions from the committee at this time? Representative John.
Thank you through the chair to the witness. Thank you for being here. Your examples, is it possible for you to maybe email those examples to the chair so that they can be shared with everybody on the committee?
For sure.
Thank you.
And I have more than that too, so I can give you the whole packet.
Thank you.
Of course.
If you send them to our office, we'll distribute them to the committee. Any other questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none. Thank you for coming this evening. Next we have Deb Gill. Deb Gill.
I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I just wanted to say good evening to everyone here on the committee, and thank you for listening to me, because I'm trying to save some time. I know it's unusual to start a speech with a summary, but that's exactly what I'm going to do here. In short, supporters of critical race theory, or CRT, teach how racism shaped public policy and life in America as we know it today. Opponents, like the sponsors and supporters of Ohio House Bill 327, call it a dangerous and divisive theory. Why? CRT is not just about race. It's also about gender, sexuality, and any other victimized class for which the political left carries a banner. CRT indoctrinates all children to look at everything through a race-first lens. White children are asked to examine their whiteness and check their privilege, as we've just heard. It is an anti-American doctrine that has no place in any Ohio school. The core of CRT is that white people are oppressors and irredeemable, and any race other than white are the oppressed and losers of society. It's a package of hate speech wrapped in the lies of the idea that racism infects all forms of American life. This is a falsehood that should not be taught in our school systems. It goes totally against what Martin Luther King Jr. preached, that we should support the principles of equality, not equity, and that we need to evaluate each other on our personal character rather than the color of our skin. Now, proponents of CRT say that Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech was racist. Unbelievable. Now, here's where equality versus equity comes into play. Equality aims for laws and opportunity to be afforded equally to all populations, regardless of race, sex, creed, etc. Equity, in the terms of CRT, aims to ensure equal outcomes amongst groups, regardless of whether those outcomes are deserved or just. The pursuit of equity results in bitterness and injustice because equity seeks to administer justice to entire racial groups instead of an individual basis. It attempts to provide opportunity to members of select races instead of opportunity for all. CRT teaches equity is good. Equality, not so much. I have a personal story to relate. When I was 10 years old, I invited several friends to a pool party. My sister, who's 6.5 years older than me, asked me when I started being friends with a black kid. Now, literally, until that very moment, I never saw Erica as black. She was a friend and an absolute sweetheart. Now, 20/20 vision is now telling me, I wonder if my sister, who was in high school at the time, was very subtly being indoctrinated regarding race even back in the late 1960s. Now there's no subtlety about it. It's in our faces and it disgusts me. You may ask the reason for this personal account? Well, here you go. Children do not look at people on the basis of race until they are taught to do so. And that's what critical race theory does. So, my first lesson in race came to me when I was just 10 years old. Now it's being taught to children as young as 5 and 6 years old. How dare school boards and teachers allow CRT in our school system? They'll be helping to raise racists that will beget more racists. And what will the outcome be? The state, and in fact the entire country, will never survive it. I implore you to pass HB 327 and disallow CRT from ever being taught in any Ohio classroom. And I will close with this quote from Ronald Reagan. Evil is powerless if the good are unafraid. And that is what you're seeing here today. Anyone who is for critical race theory being taught in our schools, state agencies, big tech companies, law enforcement agencies, and the military are evil. But guess what? The good people are no longer afraid. And that's what you're seeing in this room and all throughout the country. We are gathering together to fight the evil people, and they will go down. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your testimony. Do we have questions from the committee today? Okay.
Yes, I made myself pretty clear, didn't I?
Thank you for your testimony. Next we have John Michael. Maybe John Michael is not here. Kristen Hill. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Wiggum, Vice Chair John, Ranking Member Kelly, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. What children are being taught and are not being taught in schools in Ohio today are a concern of families, school board members, and the community at large. This is certainly not a new phenomenon, and the latest iteration of this age-old concern is captured by the term critical race theory, which we have read and heard much about lately, including today. Some of the words that are associated with critical race theory are critical theory, critical legal studies, anti-racist, racial sensitivity, equity, culturally responsive, cultural competency, and many more words which I could share if we had a little more time. It would be best to provide definitions of what each of these words means, how and in what context they are used in education, but I will save that for another time if you are interested. I will single out 3 terms and provide examples of how these terms are currently embedded and connected to materials provided by the Ohio Department of Education and the Ohio Board of Education. Equity means treating students differently depending on their membership in historically privileged or oppressed racial groups. Students from oppressed groups are given special treatment because of their race, with the ultimate goal of ensuring equal outcomes for all groups regardless of merit or effort. The word equity appears many times in the resolution, which someone previously referred to, sponsored by the Ohio Board of Education President Kohler and approved on July 14th at 11 p.m. of 2020 by the Ohio Board. The word also appears about 1,550 times in a search on the Department of Education website. Equity is not the same as equality. Equality means treating students the same regardless of race. Equality is now considered racist because students from racial groups that are considered historically oppressed should be treated better than students from other groups. Equity is the strategic plan's imperative and number one principle, and is the second clause in President Kohler's resolution. I foresee that if students are treated differently in Ohio schools based on their membership in an historically privileged or oppressed racial group, we're going to create problems, not solve problems. Culturally responsive. Culturally responsive teaching is a pedagogy that emphasizes including students' cultural references in all curricula. This is closely associated with action civics, essentially incorporating social activism into the classroom. There's a report by David Randall of the National Association of Scholars titled Making Citizens: How American Universities Teach Civics, which provides deep insight into turning education into activism, training, and recruiting. To put equity and culturally responsive teaching into practice, there is the Ohio Principal Evaluation System, also known as OPES 2.0. Number 6 lists equity and cultural responsiveness as one of the 10 standards that principals in Ohio will be evaluated on. Looking under the standard domain of culture closely on this OPES document, this is written in the chart for an accomplished principal. Quote, the administrator proactively addresses individual and collective behaviors across the system that disregard and or defy equity and cultural responsiveness, end quote. My interpretation of this is that accomplished principals, thus principals aiming to elevate their career path, will be taking negative action against a teacher who does not treat students differently depending on the student's level of privilege or teach in a culturally responsive manner. Most Ohio districts use OPES 2.0. Anti-racist. Anti-racism, in the current use of the term, means a person must be proactive and cannot be neutral on race. It is thought that it should become a way of life. The following quote from Ibram Kendi, a prominent leader in the anti-racist movement and author of How to Be an Anti-Racist, should raise concern. Quote, in order to be truly anti-racist, you also have to be truly anti-capitalist. The origins of racism cannot be separated from the origins of capitalism, end quote, end partial quote. To get rid of capitalism, which appears to be Kendi's interest, would require eliminating private property rights. If we eliminate private property rights, we eliminate trade. Vice Chair John, the readings that you referred to, I believe earlier, is titled Anti-Racism and Allyship Starter Pack, which is a long list of resources that teachers in Ohio could access on the Ohio Department of Education website. The link was quietly removed. I happened to see it before it was removed by the department in the fall of 2020 during the time of discussions between the Ohio Board of Education and State Superintendent DeMaria over the still existent today linking of the 1619 project on the department website. I have one sentence. Okay. We need unity, not division, created by the social justice movement under the umbrella of critical race theory to deliver quality education for students in Ohio schools. House Bill 327 works towards this end. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have questions from the committee? Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for coming in today. I just want to ask a little bit about the idea of like unity over division and being able to try to serve students in a way that is equitable and equal. And so I was wondering, in terms of training for teachers and things like that, do you think it's helpful for them to have training and additional resources on diversity, equity, and inclusion in order to be able to better serve their students of various backgrounds, races, sexual orientation, you name it?
You know, in my learning about this topic, since being one of the 5 that voted against this last July 14th at 11 p.m., I've really learned a lot. I've learned a lot more than what I knew then. And I want to answer your question from the perspective, maybe we need to have a conversation about what education is and what the focus should be. Because something that's kind of crossed my path, and I don't come from an education background, but those that are teachers might recognize it, a student-centered education, I think, is generally what we have formed and what's in practice today. So there's, what's education itself? Isn't education learning things outside of yourself? So should the teacher be more focused on the topic of the academics of learning to read and write and science and math and biology and all the other great topics rather than internal focus? So if we look at it from that perspective, the teachers need to learn their topics and teach the topics instead of just only focus on the personalities that are in the classroom, because those students will be inspired to, learn more because there's so much to learn.
Yeah. Follow up?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the idea of, meeting people where they are so that they are better able to succeed. So if we know that students are coming into the classroom with, other challenges that might exist in their life, and we help our educators be better equipped to recognize those and to better ascertain ways to approach those so that kids are able to better learn, math, biology, reading, whatever. And so I think my question is more about not being sort of just inside of this, but how does the ability of and the knowledge and the capability of teachers to meet students who might have other challenges because of the way that systems have been set up. So how do we make sure the teachers have the tools that they need to meet the kids where they are so that they can better focus on topic areas? I guess would be my question.
Maybe I could answer your question with the question, what are they being taught in the university? Isn't that part of them becoming professional at their craft? That they would learn how to teach?
If I just maybe reiterate the question there can be a clear answer or not an answer.
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for not being clear. So I guess my question is, if you have teachers who have a lot of students of color, or if you have teachers who are teaching kids that are gay, then maybe those things get in the way of their ability to learn depending on other things that they have going on. So if we are saying to teachers, hey, we want to provide you the tools you need. We want to send you to diversity, equity, and inclusion training so that you can recognize and we can help give you the tools for best practices so that no matter what color a kid is, no matter what their sexual orientation is, no matter how much money they have, that you can meet them where they are and help them learn better. So, because I know that sometimes when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion training, I personally think that's a good thing. I know others don't necessarily. So, but when we're talking about critical race theory, it's just about creating more recognition of this so we can try to do better. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, I don't really have a lengthy response. Like I say, I don't have an education background, so I don't have the benefit of all the things that Dr. Kilgore would know to answer your question. But off the top, if I would rely on interpersonal skills. I mean, I traveled and very much appreciated being in other countries and trying to figure out how to communicate and connect with people of other cultures and colors, and so I,
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, I can't say anything more deeply.
Okay.
Yeah.
Representative Skindell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Hill, thanks for being here and your testimony. I was wondering if you have any references to the definitions of the term equity, culturally responsive teaching, and anti-racism. If you could give us references to where that language and the description of those items, where you're pulling that from, would be helpful. I'm trying to do additional reading, and those references would be helpful.
I have a whole list of vocabulary, and that came from a fellow board member, prior board member, Ms. Woods, who spoke today. So I will check with her. Okay. Uh-huh.
All right. Seeing no further questions, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Now we have Michael Goldstein to testify for us. Welcome.
Thank you. When I heard I'd be testifying last, I opined that I would be the pitcher hitting, but Mr. Broadbent assured me I was batting cleanup. In any case, I won't be bunting. Chairman Wiggum, Chair, Vice Chair John, Ranking Member Kelly, and honorable members of the House State and Local Government Committee. My name is Michael Goldstein. I am the State of Ohio Director of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, and I am also their General Counsel. I won't go into any of my background. Some of it's in my written testimony, and we don't need to talk about it here. But my point is that because of my background, I believe we need to know where we have come from, where critical race theory came from, in order to know where we are and what we ought to do about it. There are 3 steps in the evolution of this concept, beginning with critical theory, evolving to critical legal theory, and then to critical race theory that we're dealing with here. We have to know, first of all, what these people are thinking. What is their thought process? We have to know what is their end game, what do they want to accomplish, and then we need to figure out how they're intending to accomplish it. In critical theory, and I won't go into the background of the Frankfurt School, we can talk about that another time, and it's in my written testimony. Critical theory, in the traditional Western theory, knowledge is based upon truth. To check whether something is or is not true, one must verify empirically whether the stated fact occurs or not. Knowledge is a reflection of reality. That's what we believe here. This view is firmly rejected by critical theorists for whom objectivity is a myth. Critical race theory holds that there are no universal truths. This is why they believe in storytelling rather than facts. Now, the Frankfurt scholars in the Frankfurt School at the Columbia University Teachers College tried to foment a revolution among the workers in America. They found that they could not do this because they said that the workers have bought into the belief system of what they call the ruling class, family, nation state, the capitalist system, and God, and they disdained the American workers who insisted unwaveringly on the ideology, in their words, quote, by which they are enslaved. But they discovered, CT adherents discovered a new agent of change instead of the American worker, minorities, of which more categories would need to be created, and as we know, they were. The potential to stoke grievances among them was there in a way that did not exist with American workers. I will skip through most of the critical legal theory, except to note that they acknowledge the debt that they owe to Marxism, and this is their words, quote, "Leftism aims to transform existing social structures on the basis of a critique of their injustice, and specifically at the injustices of racist, capitalist patriarchy. The goal is to replace the system," that's our system, "piece by piece or in medium or large-sized blocks with a better system." And the original Frankfurt School was an unmitigated attack on Western values. CLT scholars also focus on the rising identity groups as their new revolutionary base, the categories that they had to create. And they say, in their words, it's rooted ultimately in current activities by people of color, by labor and ecological groups, by women and by homosexuals, their words. Then we get to critical race theory. They make everything about race, and they've been very successful in doing that. Derek Bell, the godfather of critical race theory, quotes Angela P. Harris as explaining that critical race theory inherits the commitment to dismantle all aspects of Western society through unremitting criticism. Now also, critical race theory, the scholars insist that systemic racism exists in America, and that's one of the ways that critical race theory scholars seek to effect change by telling stories, the use of storytelling. And this clarifies, and by the way, there's a typo in my written testimony, it's Nicole Hannah Jones. It's the right way. I had it backwards, I'm sorry. It clarifies her response to she's the New York Times editor of the 1619 Project. She was criticized by many noted academic historians that the 1619 Project is shot through with inaccuracies. Her response was, that doesn't matter. I have in my pocket her exact quotations if people want to ask me to read them later. But in the 1619 Project, she says, is not history, was never meant to be history. Its purpose is to replace the narrative of our history from fact-based to mythical stories, or to be less charitable, from facts to propaganda. One wonders at the school systems and classroom teachers who, notwithstanding the curriculum's editor's clarification that 1619 is not history, continue to teach the New York Times Pulitzer's 1619 curriculum in history classes as though it were factual history. And here's the core of critical race theory now in America. Ceaseless assault on all American institutions and norms that includes Enlightenment ideas and political arrangements in which law protects individuals pursuing their own interests. It questions the very foundations of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, Enlightenment rationalism, neutral principles of constitutional law, strong protection of property rights, and any notion of equal protection under the law. Freedom of speech is also CRT's target. Quote, freedom to say hateful things is more important than the freedom to be free from the victimization, stigma, and humiliation that free speech entails.
Mr.
Thus,
Goldstein,
unquote.
we ran out of time for the testimony right now, for your testimony. Will you take questions from the committee?
Will.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the committee? Yes, Representative Ginter.
Thank you. There is one absolute truth that I can share with all of us tonight, and that is that we have all of this in common. We are here at 7 till 8 p.m. It is almost 8 o'clock. We're all in the same room. Thank you for your testimony. I do have a question.
Yes, sir.
And that is that in my understanding of postmodern relativism, that there are no absolutes. By the way, I've heard that 95% of our incoming freshmen recently surveyed believe that. There are no absolute truths, and that truth is something that you do not discover, but rather truth is something you create. If I am understanding you correctly, if I heard you correctly, my question is this: is postmodern or is relativism essential to the foundation of critical race theory?
Yes, I think it is. Each person, you hear people say, well, I have a great moral code. I don't believe in God, but I have a great moral code. Well, if that's what that person has, that's great. But what's the authority for it? And why should he stick to it? And each person then becomes his or her own God, in essence, creating his or her own moral code. And one person's moral code is no better or worse than somebody else's because there's no ultimate authority. And as I think most of us know, that doesn't make any sense at all. I will say that I believe the critical race theory is an unmitigated attack on the United States Constitution by getting rid of all rights, which is what they want to do. And I see my job as someone who has taken the oath several times to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States from all enemies, foreign and domestic. An unmitigated attack on the Constitution is created by an enemy, domestic enemy of the United States Constitution. That's how I feel about it. That's why I do this.
Do you have a follow-up?
Thank you.
Okay, Representative John.
Through the chair, thank you for your service to the
Thank you.
witness. So just for clarification, you talked about the 1619 project. The author, the editor, says it's not true, that it's not, let's see, how did you say that? How did she say that?
She said it's not history.
It's not history.
Yes.
Yet, I just want to clarify, on the list of documents that the Ohio Department of Education suggested reading for teachers, 1619 project. It's on the list right here, correct?
Yes, yes
Thank
it
you.
is. And the members of the State Board of Education, some of them have been asking the superintendent of public instruction how things get on there. And I know Representative Hagan has asked for over a year and he still hasn't gotten an answer. And it was John Hagan, in fact, who asked me when I testified last July before the State Board of Education. He thanked me for my service, as you have done, and I thank you. But I thought about it afterwards because people don't really know what to say to veterans, and veterans don't know what to say back to them. And I thought, well, I figured out what I'm doing, and it's what I said to the panel before, to the committee before, that's my job, to protect and defend the United States Constitution. And I had 30 years of military service, 30 years as an intelligence officer, and I guess as long as there's breath in me, I'll keep doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you
Seeing
for
no
being
further
patient
questions,
with me.
thank you for your testimony this evening.
Thanks.
This is, we have gone through our list, and so to finalize this, is there any other proponent or interested party testimonies for 327, House Bill 327? Okay, we have received numerous written testimonies, and you can see those on your iPads. And this concludes our second hearing. Then on House Bill 327, and seeing no further business, this committee stands adjourned.